Thanks, Jesse. Yeah, welcome to our talk today, Agnosticism Anonymous. Agnostics Anonymous, can we ever know anything about God? Basically, I'm going to be speaking, then there'll be a chance for some Q&A, and also just to flag up that we're recording our little talks and discussion times, so if you miss one of these, we're on all week, there'll be a chance to look on the CEU website, newcastle-cu.com, and you can download talks and follow up the conversation that way. Anyway, I thought we'd begin with a little thought experiment, and I want you to imagine that you were born in the Big Brother house. Okay, so you're born and raised in the Big Brother house. Okay, there are no D-list celebrities there or former members of Bros in there. But it's all you've ever known. It's the world of the designer kitchen or the bedroom or the living area. And for you poor things, that is the real world. That's all there is. You've no idea about life outside of that kind of closed system, the four walls. And that is until someone with a lot of time on their hands, I don't know, maybe a geography student perhaps, begins to, I'm only kidding, begins to wonder what on earth is going on over that back wall. And an engineer starts tapping away and tries to find out, and an economist sets out to work on a strategic action plan. From our point of view in the universe, it seems a little bit like that closed system of the Big Brother house. We study all manner of things to fill out more and more knowledge of this house, the closed system, if you like, of space and time. Back in the real world, the scientists, the chemists, the physicists, the biologists, the medics, they ask the how questions. How does this organism work? How do gyroscopes work? How does this or that work? The lawyers, they ask the what questions. What is or is not legal? If I'm caught speeding while driving my pregnant wife to hospital, is that okay? Historians, they ask the when questions. When did this or that happen? What can we learn from that? And the more we study, the more we fill out our knowledge of this closed system of space and time, the Big Brother house called life. But what if more is going on outside of that house than we perceive? What if there's something more to reality than those closed four walls? What about the other kinds of questions? Why are we here? Why is life as it is? The beauty, the purpose that we kind of long for inside. Maybe more importantly, the God questions. Is he really there? And if he is, how could we know him? Can we ever know anything about God? Now, some people want to sit one side of the fence and say, no, God does not exist, simple atheism. Others want to sit the other side of the fence and say, yes, God does exist, we believe he exists, simple theism, if you like. And others, many others, say, well, we don't really know one way or the other. And that is agnosticism. It's the topic we're going to be thinking about today. Can we ever know anything about God, or is really agnosticism the only sensible choice for a thinking student today? The term agnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, and when you put an a at the front, it negates it. So it's not knowledge, we don't know. First used by the 19th century biologist and friend of Charles Darwin, T.H. Huxley. Now, despite the fact that sometimes agnostics get a bit of a hard name, so people like Richard Dawkins really kind of lay into agnostics of basically being cowards, functionally disbelieving in God, but not having the guts to identify as an atheist, so they call themselves agnostics. I actually think agnosticism deserves something of a hearing. And one of the really interesting things about agnosticism is it comes in such different stripes. There's, for example, the agnostic who says you don't know whether or not God exists. You don't know. And there are some who say you can't know whether or not he exists. They're the two kinds of agnosticisms out there. You don't know, you can't know. And in The God's Delusion, by Richard Dawkins, he describes those two kinds of agnosticism as temporary agnosticism in practice, or permanent agnosticism in principle. Okay, slightly complicated ideas. Let me try and explain what he means. Temporary agnosticism in practice. Here's a quote from Dawkins. He says, it's the legitimate fence-sitting we all do where there is a definitive answer one way or the other, but so far we lack the evidence to reach it. So that's the kind of you don't know yet agnosticism. You're trying to find out, and until you know certainly, you've got to say, I don't yet know. Permanent agnosticism in principle, or PAP, is a kind of agnosticism that rejects even the possibility of ever being able to answer the question. You can never know. It says that looking for certainty in the realm of whether or not God exists is just a category error. It's just a category error. By definition, some matters can't be resolved by evidence, period. And so we just can't know. So here's T.H. Huxley, who first coined the word agnostic. In matters of the intellect, do not pretend that conclusions are certain which are not demonstrated or demonstrable. That I take to be the agnostic faith. So certain conclusions about the existence of God, one way or the other, are simply beyond our sense perception. We can't demonstrate them. They can never be demonstrated to us. And we're just stuck in the big brother house of life, and all we can do is analyse and probe and draw conclusions about what's inside the house, and necessarily can't conclude anything at all one way or the other about what may be outside the house. So we've got to remain permanently agnostic in principle. You can never know, ever. But show me the demonstrable proof that convinced you that you need demonstrable proof before you do anything. Kind of begs the question. I don't often know that we live in that kind of world. It doesn't quite work. Just because a prisoner is chained to the wall of his prison and can't touch the nose of the guard opposite him doesn't mean that the guard can't walk up to the prisoner and touch his nose in return. I.e., just because we're limited in our investigative scope at the moment doesn't mean that everything else in the whole of reality is limited from its scope by definition. Just because we are limited doesn't mean anything else is limited. Just because I can't detect intelligent life on other planets doesn't mean necessarily that they can't detect us or even communicate to life here on Earth. Don't worry, I'm not saying I believe in little green men, but little green hoodies are great fun this week, you'll see. Which means, by analogy, just because we can't see God with a telescope doesn't necessarily imply that he can't see us. And so I want to suggest that those two agnosticisms on the screen, if you put them up, Phoebe, the two ones on the table, the you don't know yet and you can't know ever, I have to say it's the you can't know ever agnosticism. It just doesn't seem very reasonable. So let's think a bit more about the you don't know yet agnosticism. Is that the only reasonable choice? I'm not going to try and persuade you of much today. I just want to get you to think. Is that the most reasonable thing? You don't know yet. Is that the happy one to go for? Well, again, I think there were three kinds of you don't know yet agnosticism. Okay, so we're going to work through those very briefly. There's the you don't know and don't care agnosticism. I imagine that's the biggest of the agnosticisms out there. Don't know, don't care. The likelihood is if you're here today, that's probably not where you're at. If you are, you're very, very welcome. Then there's the I don't know and I don't want to know. So don't know, don't care, don't know, don't want to know agnosticism. And the third one is the don't know but do want to know. Okay, they're the three kinds, I think. And we're going to work through those three kinds of agnosticism. So firstly, don't know, don't care. For those of you who are here today or listening to this online, I understand it. I want to challenge you, though. Because the stuff to do with God and Jesus and heaven and hell and all these kind of big, crazy ideas that Christians seem to go on and on about, it doesn't seem enormously relevant to you, does it? I'll be honest. I have sympathy for it. It's not what's the relevance there between that and the big essay crisis, or what you're going to do when you graduate, or the next big night out, or the Stan Calvert next month. You know, they seem so kind of, they're much more in my face, whereas who honestly cares about these random ideas? You may have heard of the well-meaning poster that was put up in the front of church. Why face boredom alone? Come to church. Or you can think about it. Or the other one is, if you lined up, you may have heard, if you lined up everyone who'd ever fallen asleep in church in a line on the floor, they'd all be a lot more comfortable. And honestly, who cares whether God exists? You just think, don't know, don't care. 2 quick challenges for you if that is you. Firstly, just because something doesn't feel urgent doesn't make it unimportant. Just because it doesn't feel urgent doesn't make it unimportant. However relevant the God issue feels to you, that really has 0 relevance when it comes to whether he's there or not. It's irrelevant whether you feel that it's important, whether he's there or not. So, for example, trivial example, you guys here at Newcastle, I've got to know you a bit. You strike me as a kind of Movember crowd. When it comes to Movember, you probably get lots of kind of nice big kind of moustaches, those of you who can grow them. The issue of whether or not you have cancer, which is what the Movember thing happens each year, is to do with, that might not feel very urgent. Very relevant. It might seem miles and miles away, something that old people get, other people get. That has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on whether you have it or not, its urgency or otherwise. Which leads to my second challenge. The greater the claim being made, the greater your interest should be. The greater the claim being made, the greater your interest should be. If cancer was like man flu, then it'd be fine not to worry about it. And honestly, guys, man flu is not cool to make a fuss over. But cancer, as we know, its potential claim on you is so much bigger than man flu, which means it's in your interest to make sure you're clear. Or take a happier illustration. Say you hear that in a couple of weeks' time, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are coming to visit Newcastle. All very, very exciting. But then you go back to your room in your halls of residence or your house at home, and there's a letter through the post. And it's on gold embossed university headed notepaper. And it's signed the Chancellor, Sir Ian Donaldson, and he is inviting you to attend a reception which William and Kate are speaking at. The chances are you don't say, "I don't care." Some of you may, I think most of us would think, "I'm slightly interested." Of course, there could be a fake, and if you're into faking things, that would be a great one to do, wouldn't it? But the chances are it piqued your interest somehow. And I have to say that just a casual glance at the claims being made by Jesus Christ and by Christianity, a God who would die for people who hated him, that's just huge. A God who would rise again and offer to whoever came to him forgiveness and friendship, even though we'd ignored him. That's massive. I don't know how don't know, don't care agnosticism seemed very reasonable. How about don't know, don't want to know agnosticism? That's the next one that we might think about. This one's interesting. Let's look at the second one, Phoebe. Don't know, don't want to know. You might call it kind of deliberate or studied agnosticism, where you're deliberately wanting to stay in the dark. It's the kind of mindset, I don't know how many of you drive, it's the mindset of the motorist who is in the middle lane of the motorway driving along, and there's an outside lane about to join your lane. I don't know how many of you drive and can identify with what I'm saying here. And you're driving along, and you deliberately don't make eye contact with people on your right-hand side. It's like, I don't want to know whether there's a car coming in and wants to give way. I don't want to know. I'm just going to keep on looking and stay in the dark about whether I need to give way. And you kind of pretend that, yeah, I'm not looking at you. And I'm agnostic about one whether, and I deliberately am trying to stay in the dark. Now, I have to say, I find it partly surprising that, I'm not surprised by that, I do that all the time, but you guys at university, you're here to study and to work out what this world is all about, trying to make sense of the universe and everything. And if you're a scientist, I once upon a time studied engineering, if you're one of those or an engineer, and you think there's a problem, I want to solve it. There's a Hoover, I'm going to break it apart and fix it. If there's a God, I want to go and find him. And so I find it slightly surprising if you're saying, I don't know and I don't want to know. I hope you want to find the truth and take the lead wherever truth leads you. Because my hunch is, I say it's surprising, partly surprising, but not entirely surprising. Because if I'm honest, my hunch is that people with don't know, don't want to know agnosticism are perhaps basically afraid of where it will lead if God is really there. I think if you're honest, that is the case. If it is the case, I think I want to say, well, what exactly are you afraid you'll find See, very often when I chat with students, I think that they think that God, if he exists at all, he's out to get me if he's there. His sole purpose in life is to ruin my life. One big divine killjoy. So I don't want him to be there, so I'm not going to even think about whether he is there or not. If that's the God who's there, then no thank you. I'd rather not find out about him. Don't know, don't want to know. If that is you, can I urge you this week just to suspend that kind of prejudice? Because I'm so sorry you've picked up the wrong end of the stick about God. That is not what he's like at all. Jesus Christ himself, when he came, said he came to bring life in all its fullness. He came to bring us freedom and satisfaction deep within. In fact, the Bible describes getting to know God akin almost to getting married. That's the kind of language that's used. Now, of course, life changes when you get married. It'll change if you get to know God. But I don't know a single Christian who knows God who would discourage you from doing it, who'd discourage you from giving God the serious thought that he demands. Which again makes me want to conclude, I can't see how don't know, don't care agnosticism is an especially reasonable choice. Which leads us to our third one, don't know but do want to know. Now imagine we're back in the big brother house of life and you're beginning to wonder if there is something over that back wall. And maybe you're there with a bunch of friends and you're there and you're sitting and it's late at night and, you know, all the best discussions happen late at night. I hope you have those. And you and a few friends are batting it around together. And the first friend has given up already. They went to bed and stopped talking a long time ago. They announced, I'm permanently agnostic in principle. Whether or not God exists, no, I didn't. Something exists outside that, I have no idea. Good night. And he heads off. The second friend likes making the conversation, but gets pretty bored pretty quickly. Although she's strangely distracted by a text message that comes in from her bank claiming that £100,000 has just been put into her account. And she goes off to think, this is a huge claim, I need to wander off and investigate. So she heads off. You've got your third friend there who's also a bit suspicious about these big brother conspiracy theories. He's worried if what he's read on Twitter is true. If there is a big brother, he's out to get you and to ruin your fun. And he's going to move you around his chessboard like a pawn. And he says, I don't want to think where that's going to go, and heads off to bed too. And it's just you. You're the only one left at the table. You don't know, but do want to know whether there is more outside. I've got three final suggestions for you. Three final suggestions that we'll look at, and then we'll hand over to you for some questions. First suggestion, if that's you, look around. Look around. St Paul's Cathedral was built by Sir Christopher Wren, and he's the architect who made it, and he's buried in the crypt of St Paul's. But when he died, he left in his will that he didn't want anyone to build a kind of a memorial for him anywhere else. He didn't want an elaborate tomb. Instead, on his tombstone, he had the words written in Latin, Si monumentum requiris circumspice. If you want to see his monument, look around you. And the memorial to Christopher Wren is not a little tombstone, it's the whole of St Paul's Cathedral. That's his monument he wanted. Well, so too in the kind of closed system, space, time world of science that we live in, if you want to see God's monument, I want to say, look around you. Look at the breathtaking scale of the universe, or the amazing fine-tuning of its dimensionless constants which sustain life. Maybe you want to go out and have a look at the beauty of an amazing sunset over the Grand Canyon, or the delicate skin of a newly born baby. Sure, many unbelievers use science as a weapon against God's existence. I think countless others have found that it's studying science that has drawn them closer to belief in God. Perhaps most famously and recently, the late philosopher Anthony Flew, who was the UK's leading atheist, who wrote many books in the 60s and 70s on atheism. It was studying the science that convinced him that a God existed, not the other way round. The big brother house of life, this created order we inhabit, it seems to have God's fingerprints all over. If you don't know if God exists, you want to know, look around. That's our first point. Secondly, look within. Look within. Russell Brand gave an interview with Jeremy Paxman a few years ago. I don't know if you saw it. And he said in that interview that for all the fame that his TV celebrity status has accrued for him, it's just been empty. And he said, quote, "It's been like ashes in my mouth." And then he says, of course there's something more to life, he says, but it's as if he's been living life for the shadows, but rather feels that life should be about getting to the source of life itself. Then there's Sam Sparrow's song Black and Gold, and you can hear his despair. The fish swam out of the ocean, they grew legs, started walking. The apes climbed down from the trees, they grew tall, started talking. The stars fell out of the sky and my tears rolled into the ocean. If that's all the case, then he says, then now I'm looking for a reason why you even set my world into motion. Now I'm filled to the top with fear that it's all just a bunch of matter. We look within us and we say, well, surely, surely there's meaning in the world. There are objective realities outside of myself and the human construct we've made. The 4th century philosopher Augustine famously wrote, "O God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you." The ground, I'd argue, for objective morality or for a sense of meaning and purpose in this world, if you don't know if God exists, but you want to know, well, look within. Now imagine you're back in that Big Brother house of life. Everyone's gone to bed, it's just you, and then suddenly you're about to go to bed, and then there was a knock at the door. Big Brother is coming in. Knock on the door swings open wide, and in bursts Davina McCall, you know, what poor you. But all bets are suddenly off. There was something more to life, more to the Big Brother house of life, but it took someone coming in from the outside inside to make it crystal clear. Well, so it is with Jesus Christ. You don't know if God exists, but you want to know, well, look at Jesus. That's our third point. And the extravagant claim of Christianity that we're going to be thinking about this week is that in Jesus Christ, God, the maker of the Big Brother house of life, has come in through the front door so that we might understand all about who he is. There's a Bible verse from John 1:14. I'm going to quickly read out to you. It says the following: "The Word," that's speaking of God, "became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." You want to find out about God? Well, look to Jesus. As much man as man is man, but the claim is he's as much God as God is God. It was witnessed by hundreds of people. He was born as a baby, ultimately growing up to die on a cross, rising then in victory 3 days later and offering us friendship with him. These are massive claims, but they're massively substantiated, and they are surely, surely worth checking out. Now that's all from me, and what I wanted to do now is just give you an opportunity for some Q&A, but before we do that, it may be I've just kind of assumed a whole load. Come back at me in any way you'd like. In fact, on the floor underneath your seats, you'll find these tiny little slips of paper and pens. Why don't you grab one of those, if you could?